so soon into this process, God taught me, man, you have no control over this. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about generational trauma, what I'm talking about is, first of all, kids who come out of the foster system. And actually, it doesn't even matter if they're in the foster system, but a lot of kids come from ACEs, or what we call adverse childhood experiences. And those experiences shape the remainder of their lives.
Welcome to the Diary of a Discarded Daughter. I am your host and the original Christian drama queen, Lisa Schaefer, and I'm glad that you are here today. Kristen Brock is a speaker, coach, trainer, facilitator, and host of the podcast Jesus, Justice, and Mercy. As a solo mom of 3 sons, 2 through adoption from foster care, she weaves lived experience with professional expertise at the intersection of trauma, race, adoption, and faith. With an MS in marriage and family counseling and an MA in theology and social justice in progress, Kristen speaks, trains, and coaches in 2 primary areas: trauma, helping individuals and organizations like churches pursue healing, and social justice, equipping Christians to engage their faith with clarity and courage. She also walks alongside women navigating the tension between inherited faith and a growing call to justice. At the heart of her work is a longing for the church to embody the compassion of Jesus and become a community where healing and justice can flourish. We got started talking about something very important, and it was about our kids. She and I both have children. We are both interracial families, and it's just a different dynamic. And so when we started talking about that, here's what happened. So here we go. Tell me a little bit about where you're at and what it is that you feel like God's called you to do.
Sure. So thanks for having me, Lisa. My name is Kristen, and I live in Northern California. I'm about 30 minutes north of the Golden Gate Bridge, or north of San Francisco. I think, when you say, what has God called you to do? At my age, it has been a, decades-long process of things God has called me to. But over the last couple of decades, it has really been around social justice. I'm getting a master's in theology and social justice right now, as well as talking to churches about generational trauma, how that shows up, and that's through my personal story.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm not quite sure that everybody understands what we mean when we say generational trauma.
Yeah. So my short story is I got divorced when my oldest son was 6-ish, or separated at that point. And I always wanted more kids. I always thought I wanted a big family. And for whatever reason, God didn't bring anyone else in my life. I didn't get remarried. And about 10 years ago now, I had some friends who had adopted through the foster system. And it's something I had never thought of. At that age, I did not want babies. And through a long series of events, I ended up with 2 biological brothers who were 9 and 10 when I first met them, and they moved into my home. And so that began a very long process of, I would say, letting go of control. I have a master's in marriage and family counseling. I had worked in child detention centers before. I had worked in group homes before. I thought I was prepared. I thought I was ready. And just so soon into this process, God taught me, man, you have no control over this. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about generational trauma, what I'm talking about is, first of all, kids who come out of the foster system. And actually, it doesn't even matter if they're in the foster system, but a lot of kids come from ACEs, or what we call adverse childhood experiences. And those experiences shape the remainder of their lives in terms of physical, emotional, mental, how they show up. That kind of trauma is carried generationally. So we know the studies that were done on Holocaust survivors. So generations later, the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors still held that trauma in their body. And so that's when I talk about generational trauma, that's probably in the simplest form what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about that trauma being in the body of someone who maybe didn't experience it in their generation, but they know it was impacting their parents and grandparents.
Yes.
So how is it that they carry that in within later?
Yeah, so there's probably a couple different ways. I won't go too much into the physical part, but it doesn't change your DNA structure, but it changes the way the DNA shows up in the body. And so there actually is a physical, biological component to that, that our bodies recognize. The
Wow.
second way that it shows up is just as we parent through our own experiences. And
Right.
so we are going to naturally give our children things or protect them in different ways. Or, I think one of the things we have talked about is my boys are biracial. So I am going to parent them differently than I parented my white son. And so if I'm a Black mother, I am going to have a different style of parenting, not only because of the history of the enslaved in this country, but also
you have experience in that category, right? So you live as so absolutely, it makes sense. It's like living as the daughter of someone in poverty, and then raising my children in contrast to someone my exact age, maybe gone through even similar experiences, and yet they were not raised impoverished, so they don't know the kinds of things that have been. So it does impact it makes us who we are. It really does make us who we are, and that does extend to the way that we parent. So you and I do have several things in common. We both have adopted kids, and we are an interracial family. We purposely adopted children that needed us without any thought basically to gender or race or any of that. So so we have some similar experiences. And the thing I want to talk about today, what I entitled our interview, Adoption Trauma and How the Church Has No Clue. And I don't mean that to be ugly. I'm not trying to be ugly, but and I've been very forthright about the way that I feel I personally handled being an adoptive parent, which was I was not prepared. I think most adoptive parents, if they don't try otherwise to do differently, they assume if we protect those babies and because my children were all infants, but if we protect them, if we teach them about Jesus, if we raise them in the church around loving people, if we do our very, very best to have understanding and love and all of that, that we're going to be able to raise these perfect, fantastically healed, adjusted,
resilient.
They're going to be perfect. These are going to be the perfect kids at the homeschool group, right? So, so I think that, and it wasn't like all of that stuff was not important. All of that stuff was important. The things that we did to teach them about the Lord and His Word and the history of God and about their need for salvation, all of that stuff is important. We loved them like they were ours. We loved them, but we didn't have a clue what they were going through. And in fact, a lot of people do not understand, and I've talked about this before in another episode, reactive attachment disorder, which is a common diagnosis for a lot of kids who experience a lot of foster care situations. Reactive attachment disorder is basically, in a nutshell, a child's inability to accept the security that is offered to them from someone who cares, and they will in fact sabotage really good relationships in order to prevent them from being hurt first. And so what we did not realize at the time, until our son was almost 16 years of age, our oldest, was that he was experiencing some reactive attachment disorder issues when he had been with us since birth. And it wasn't until then that I realized that research had indicated that if there is not security in the womb, children do not develop those pathways that they need to feel secure in a secure
setting. Isn't that crazy?
Isn't that crazy?
Oh, I got them the moment they came out.
Yes. And what's happening is the brain waves and the security synapses and all of that stuff, that's all being developed in the womb. It's why children, I believe, who are in environmentally, their birth parents or birth mothers are in danger, or they are impoverished, or they are just insecure because of their living situation, or on the streets or whatever. those babies have trouble. And if we had known what we found out later, if I'd known that when he was born, I'd have strapped that little sucker on and carried him around for 2 years. I would have tried to help those synapses develop, those brain waves develop, but we didn't know what we know now. And I think in the same way, the church, corporate church, God love them, does not really understand the impact that these kids' trauma, and in some cases, like our kids, they came straight from the hospital to our home where they didn't experience a whole lot of neglect or any of that, right? They were well cared for, and we loved them, and we took them to church. We were a pretty normal looking family, except for the fact that we looked like a rainbow every time we walked in the door. But the church assumes, like I did, that loving them is enough.
Love is enough. Yeah.
What do you say? What would you like to tell the church who is very loving and has great intentions? What are some things that you feel like they could do differently or ought to know?
So I think the primary thing is just to listen. These families do not always look like what the church expects them to look like. And that can be anything from single parents to how our children behave, how they show up. I have some stories about my kids in a youth group, and their trauma was showing up, and the church didn't know what to do with it. They just assumed they're poorly behaved.
And they're poorly behaved because of us, because of the parents, right? There's this parenting. Well, so in my case, I've had him since birth. How could there possibly be any trauma or suffering that they've dealt with? People don't know. They just don't know. They don't understand. So I think,
education is critical. And we also know from the ACEs study, the original ACEs study was done with middle class, white, employed people with full-time jobs and health insurance. So that's kind of like
normal
States,
right? People, normal people.
So the ACEs numbers from that are unbelievable. So the other thing is, we're not just talking about the family that has foster kids or the single mom. These kind of behaviors can show up in the family that looks absolutely perfect on the outside, and you are questioning the parenting because of the behavior you see in the child.
Right. I can remember, and I won't name names, but I can remember a family who came to us, and it was obviously because I could relate because of what we had been through, but there were 40 other families in the homeschool group that did not have a clue about what it was like to deal with children who were struggling with abandonment or trauma from their past, or just from, in utero. And so another family had come, and those kids had said some things or used some off-color language or whatever. And the very commonly very loving families were so afraid of their kids getting traumatized that they
rub off.
It's going to rub, but that they withdrew, and this poor mother never came back. And I don't know that she ever found the kind of support that she needed with those kids. They were older kids. They were 16 and 12. And I think that looking back now and knowing what I know now, I think there's the strongest possibility that the assumption was from those loving, wonderful Christian women in the homeschool group that we were part of. I think I was president of at the time, that the kids were bad because the parents didn't know how to parent.
Yeah.
And instead of having that conversation or going and say, how can we support you and help you? What is it that's happening that we can reach out and minister to? We just withdraw, like you said, like it's catching, it's going to, all of a sudden our kids are going to start using bad language because they're around that one kid who's traumatized and has struggles in social settings. So what do we tell the church? So we need to tell them to listen. You already brought that one up.
So the other thing that I would share, and this is a quick story about my youngest. He had come home from another stint in a group home. It was when he was fully adopted, but just needed some extra support that the family could not offer him. And ironically, he came home the Friday before the COVID shutdowns happened. And so I was so thankful to get him home. But literally, we got the email from the school on the way home that said, hey, we're moving to Zoom on Monday. And,
good
he's like,
timing.
hey, no school. He was in middle school at the time. And one of the things he was really excited about was his youth group, going back to youth group. And I would say the church that we were going to at the time did a beautiful job of pivoting, the word we all now hate, to a virtual youth group that first night.
Right.
And so he sat on my bed with my little laptop and was so excited. And the first thing they did was a scavenger hunt, which was really fun. And he,
while they're on Zoom, they're doing a scavenger.
Yeah, they're all on Zoom. So they're
I love that idea.
So like, go find a purple pencil and then hold it up, and you get points for that. And he kind of looked at me. He's like, Mom, they don't see me. I said, buddy, there's so many kids. Like, they're just kind of figuring this out. So about partway through, they said, 10 points if you can get a baby picture. Well, guess what? We don't have baby pictures. Right. Because my kids came to me at 9. I've got some pictures from their mom when they were like 4 and 5.
Right.
He just looks at me and shrugs his shoulders and went on. Now, that might not be the only reason to have baby pictures. Maybe at a fire. This is like pre-digital, right? Mm-hmm. And then it went to the end. At the end, they said, bonus points if you can get your dad in the picture. And so he looks at me and shrugs again because A, I'm a single parent. Yeah. And B, he's got a lot of trauma with his bio dad.
Right.
And he just looked at me and shrugged his shoulders, and he didn't go back to youth group for a year.
And see, this is the thing.
Church did not intentionally harm, right?
It's not like we understand. Yeah. It's just like those Sunday mornings when I was the only woman infertile in the church, and everybody said we announce in church that such and such is having a baby after she had years of infertility. Yeah. And I'm the one sitting there, the only one sitting there that's never been pregnant. Yeah. And it's not like they're trying to hurt you. Yeah. It's that we do have some ignorance, and obviously we need to work on our own ability to forgive ignorance. We do need to work on that.
Yeah.
But when you are a child and you're already trying to deal with forgiving abandonment and abuse situations, and like you said, this fatherlessness, this lack of ability to trust, you're already dealing with that. For the church for him to so look forward to being in that safe space, and walk away with being triggered with his own experiences, that it's not that it's anyone's fault. It's really more that it's ignorance. It's just a lack of education. And if we're going to deal, if we're going to minister to families that have these kinds of things happening with these kids, with these children, it really is it's our responsibility to research who we're ministering to. It's much like the women that I reach out to and want to walk through this process of getting from bitterness to forgiveness. I have to be open to allowing them to still hurt. Yeah. Even though I figured it out and it took me 40 years to get there, and I know they're going to get there. If I don't provide them a space where I'm not making it worse, where I'm allowing them to hurt, and giving them some space to be a victim while we get from the place where we don't have to be victimized anymore. That you
can't pray to miracle healing, right? Like you're not praying hard enough. Same right? You're not praying hard enough. There's sin in your life somewhere. There's all those things that churches can say that are super. It can be as simple as a kid or even an adult putting extra cookies in their pocket, and the church seeing it as stealing. When, for that kid, probably had food insecurity at some point. To them, it's not stealing. To them, it's survival.
It's survival.
And so searching out what is a trauma-informed church, what does that look like? Where can you get resources for that?
So what is a trauma-informed church? What do they have to do to be more, because, like I said, our churches aren't trying to be hurtful. They're not. No. But where do we send them for that kind of support and education? Because I can see this being a workshop at just about every church in the country.
Absolutely. I would say the simplest thing you can do is just type in trauma-informed churches. There are a couple of really big churches and really pretty big people that are doing this work. Mm-hmm. But just kind of every church is different, right? So it's going to look different for every church. But I agree. Have somebody come speak about it. Have a workshop. Send all your youth ministers to a workshop on it, just so they can understand what I always say. Education is the key, right?
Right.
I always call it unintentional harm. Those youth leaders weren't intentionally trying to hurt my child.
No.
I write about that story, and what I say at the end is, they were never going to see Deshaun when he was saying, they don't see me, right? Because they didn't understand his story. Now, they have since come to know his story, and I would say this church has done a phenomenal job. I was able to go talk to the youth leaders and say, I just want to share with you.
Well, then let's talk about that, because
it's not the only single parent.
What does a mom do, or what does a dad do? What is a parent in your situation, or in ours at the time? How do we approach the leadership of the church and say, listen, here's what was happening, or here's what happened. I just want you to know this is going on.
Yeah.
How do you approach it? Because like we've been saying, it's not like anybody's intentionally hurting. And I know for a fact, if the leaders in my church that were doing the whole celebrate this mom getting pregnant thing while I was standing there without any warning, if they had known that was going to be my reaction, they wouldn't have done it that way. They'd have come to me first and said, I'm just giving you some warning, But how do we approach this when we say, listen, this is what's happening. You may not see it. How do we approach it?
Yeah. So I would say on the back end, would be a red flag issue for me with the church. So if you are the person experiencing pain, and I would say this is any kind of pain, any kind of unintentional harm the church is doing, I think it's really important to go to somebody you trust and just say, this is how it affected me. I just want to share how it affected me. Now, the church's response to me is where the red flag comes out.
Right. Because if they don't respond properly,
So in my situation, I offered, I am more than willing for free to come talk to the youth group leaders and just talk to them about what childhood trauma looks like, how it shows up in these middle school, particularly middle school, which is so awful anyway, right? I'm like, God bless.
Do you think
youth group.
And it's really important that we make sure that we're approaching it in a non-confrontational way too.
Absolutely.
Because I never want somebody who loves my kids and wants to minister Jesus to my kids. I never want them to feel like, you were a horrible person and you did this horrible thing. That's not how I want to approach it at all. Yeah. I think that it does take some guidance from the Holy Spirit before you walk into that room, and make sure that humility leads the way, that pride goes before destruction. So our best option is to humbly submit. There's still the leadership of the church. I get that. Yeah. But to humbly say, I absolutely want you to understand this is not an attack. I'm not.
It's not a judgment.
I'm not confronting you. I'm letting you know this is maybe a place where we could minister differently. And we just don't know it yet. We didn't know it. And now we can. I love that.
People, right? Can I share how this affected my son?
Right.
That's very different than saying, you guys ran this thing. You didn't pay attention to,
Yeah.
So
because it's
that's
ignorant.
when I talk about listening, right? At first, if we can, and I would say this, this is kind of my soapbox, but I could say this in a giant general sense of the church. Yeah. If we did a better job at understanding and not judging people's pain.
Well, and here's the other thing.
Church would be different.
Whatever happened to youth leaders doing some one-on-one time with some families, so that you didn't just get to know those people in a group. You got to know them one-on-one and went over or had them over for dinner and said, hey, tell me about your kid. Tell me about your life. Tell me about what triggers them, what hurts them, what they've been through, especially when they know. I mean, when people look at my family, it's pretty obvious, that we're not all.
But the family has to feel like that's a safe place, right?
Right.
So for me to say, come over and let me break bread with you, which I believe is a powerful, powerful space to break bread together. I have to trust you with our story. I have to trust you with my vulnerability. I have to trust you with my kid's story, which is a very personal, deeply personal. I always say now that my youngest is now 19, it's their story to share, not mine.
Right.
But in order to do what you,
because we asked my kids permission. Hey,
right?
Can I talk about that one time? And they're like, whatever.
Yeah. So in order to do that, you have to be able to trust leadership with what they are going to do with your story, because we all know, the church horror stories of I shared this and it backfired on me, right?
It's kind of heartbreaking to me that it's not automatically assumed that we can be safe in that space with our stories and our kids' stories. And so I think it does take some slow going, getting comfortable with people and making sure that you are in a trusted space, a safe space. And what can I do as a parent to prepare my kid for the unwitting behaviors of the church in their life, to help them understand, like you said, honey, it wasn't intentional. It wasn't that they couldn't see you. They wouldn't see you. It was that they couldn't see you. How do you prepare them?
So my kids or other kids, like as a parent of kids who are in the church.
Yeah, I think as a parent of kids who struggle with trauma anyway, and let's face it, we're getting to a place where it's an epidemic of kids suffering through abandonment or trauma. There was a time when I was the oddball in the class and everybody else's dad came to all the events. Now it's quite common that sometimes there's two dads with mom, one that's a step and one that's a biological. And sometimes it's like half the class has no dads. And so it is an epidemic thing where we've got a lot of abandonment and a lot of abuse and kids. And we're just now, it's like, for so many, many years, I think we purposely didn't see it. Now that we're seeing it, what do we do with it? And how do we prepare our kids for people's ignorance and what they're going to do with it?
So I don't have a magic answer for that, right? Because our kids are in a process of healing all through of this. So all I can do is love them and say, this is probably what was going on, buddy. So all I can do is love them and share. I just went through a situation with my 19-year-old that was in an online group of friends, and there was just some inappropriate conversation. And he actually has backed away from that group. And all I can say is like, I'm sorry that was happening. I'm sorry that you don't feel like you can be friends with those people right now, but I'm so proud of you for sticking up for what you believe in.
Right. And for protecting yourself. See, now you have the ability to see that as an unsafe space for you and back up and walk away. That's impressive. That really is impressive.
And it depends on what age our kids are, right? When they don't have any capacity to understand certain things when they're young. So as a parent, you're just as you are with any kid, you're kind of gauging like what's appropriate to share with them. And these kids that, and I would say like the caveat is always, it may be the home that looks perfect on the outside, but these kids that struggle with feeling love, no matter what is around them, it's just a continual process of being there for them. Just space, being there in that space for them.
Right. Well,
I love it in the way they need to.
Yeah, I have enjoyed every conversation I've had with you. Well, for a couple of different reasons. It's very seldom that I find somebody that can relate to things that I say immediately. Like they're like, "What do you mean?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean." So it's not very often.
Oh yeah, we have to in our family.
But I also I love seeing how God has guided you to minister to your kids, to your boys, and to help them walk through some really hard stuff. So how can people reach you and why should they?
That's a great question. So you can reach me through my website, which is KristenArnett.com. And I will, you can probably put it in the show notes or however you
I will. Yes.
I love speaking to audiences about this. I love doing workshops for churches. I actually do individual coaching. So if you are an adult who has been through some trauma, I can coach you through that. And it's all faith-based, which I think is a really beautiful thing. And it's not just, as you have said, it's not just the Band-Aid of, boy, if you trusted God more, or if you read your Bible more, or if you prayed more. these are deep hurts.
Yep.
So that's what I love doing, is just talking through, talking with people. And as you and I said, like, if I knew now, my dad at one point asked me, if you knew what you knew now, would you do this again? And I said, absolutely. But I think I would have come to it with much more education, much less pride.
Oh yeah, there's a little arrogance when we just think all we have to do is love them into a secure place, right?
Yeah.
There's a little arrogance there. I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, like, my bio kid was easy. I thought parenting was like a breeze. And because I had all that background, I'm like, I knew it would be hard, but I didn't think it was going to be like this kind of hard. So yeah, that humility, the learning, and honestly, the one thing God keeps poking me on is how little control I have. I kind of like to control things. It's safe when I can control things. And the thing I put in my head all the time is God is consistently telling me, I love them more than you do. And so you need to trust me with this.
Right. Oh, it's so hard.
Yeah, letting go, right? And saying, I trust you with this. I trust you with the process, especially when you are in the deep, dark dungeon.
Yeah. I can remember days where I just cried and cried and cried and cried. That's all I could do is cry and cry and cry. And I felt,
where are you, God?
Yeah. And I felt the Lord say, you've spent all these years, you wrote 2 Bible studies about me being there. So you're letting people know that I'm there for you. What makes you think I'm not going to be there for them, or that I don't see their struggle, or that I don't see their pain? And more than that I'm not going to use it. I'm going to use it to get it. One of the things that I teach is that God does not waste the sin that happens, whether it's by us or to us. He's not going to waste that. He's going to use that. And then when it says God works all, and we know that God works all things together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Okay. I can say, I know that. I can say that all those things work, and believe me, it is work. But when you're on the end of it that doesn't see that happening, then you can say that you know it, but you still need something that feels tangibly affected and working.
Yeah, and we don't know what that's going to look like, right? So my youngest has some mental health issues, and we've been through a roller coaster with that. Yeah. I have constantly prayed for complete healing, and have not seen that. Do I think it might happen in the future? Maybe. But I also have to be open to the fact that how is God going to use him? And regardless story in this. No matter what. No matter what.
It's vital, I think, for us to remember that there were people in Scripture with withered hands, blinded eyes, leopard skin. Those people God used. And so for us to assume that he can't use these broken vessels that we call our kids is, again, pretty arrogant. To think that
I just did a study on that, right? Like God using the unlikely. So he used a prostitute in Rahab. Yes. He used a stutter in Moses to speak for a nation. He used Gideon, who just could not trust God for
or the adulterous woman at the well. She's the first evangelist. And then we have in Scripture, she's the first recorded
evangelist. So that beauty of God using. And I hate to say the broken, because that makes an illusion that, you're not fixed, but God uses the most unlikely of us, right, to carry his story out in a hurting world.
Right. And he's always done that. Done that. Look at that mess the disciples were.
Oh my gosh. When you study the disciples, they kind of crack me up, right?
And you see yourself in all of them. Oh, I'm so like that.
Yeah. I'm like, they saw the miracles firsthand, and yet they kept saying, like, I love the story about Peter, after they had, the Jewish people had expected for so long a king, right? We want somebody to overthrow the government. And even after Peter had seen everything he had seen for 3 years, after Jesus is resurrected, he's like, okay, is now the time we overthrow Rome?
Yeah. We're still going back to the old school stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give your website again. It's Kristen Annette. And is it ANNETTE?
It is,
All
because
right.
there was another Kristen Brock who is some young budding artist, so I had to go with the middle name.
Did you know that the Lisa Schaefer, I wanted to have lisaschaefer.com as my website. The lisaschaefer.com gal is an artist.
Oh.
The other Lisa Schaefer.
And it's these kids who got their names, like the URL names, when they were 2, right? As opposed to us, who there weren't even URLs when we were that age.
We didn't even know what that meant. I still don't know what that meant.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much for being
you're welcome,
with
Lisa.
me
I appreciate
today.
you having me.
I really appreciate you being here. And that's going to do it for me today, guys. Thanks for joining me today on The Diary of a Discarded Daughter. Oh, such a good interview with Kristen Brock, right? If you want more information about what she has to offer, go to her website. All of those links will be listed in the information below the podcast right here. And just appreciate you guys being here. Listen, if you need to have some freedom facilitation services and you're not sure exactly what that sounds like, hit me up on my calendar. It's very easy to find. calendar.christiandramaqueen.com. Pick a date and time. We will meet, pray, talk, and discuss your needs for freedom, a way to battle back all of the bitterness and find some freedom and forgiveness. To be quite honest with you, most people just tell me they're just not ready to forgive. And I get it. I totally get it. But let's talk. And at the very, very least, have some prayer time about the whole thing. Don't forget to share the podcast with other people. Make sure that you go to my website, christiandramaqueen.com. You can find all kinds of good stuff there. There's some freebies available to you if you sign up for my email list. There's even an assessment there that will talk to you a little bit about the future of forgiveness and finding a way to do that. And listen, I love you.